A homo predator's 85 victims, 85, are finally having their horrible stories told by a rather unlikely source. Now joining us, Church Militant's Rome correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomez. Jules, 85 young men, some of them seminarians, were sexually abused by a Jesuit priest over a period of 40 years, and the Jesuit order covered it up all the way to the Vatican. How did their stories finally get told?
Brad, in terms of the chronicles of clerical sex abuse and cover-up, this is one of the most traumatic. The horror stories only came to light because Father Alfonso Pederast, also known as Padre Pica, left behind a diary where he spilled the beans and confessed to what he had done.
So who had access to this diary that it finally came to light?
Padre Pica left behind his computer to the boyfriend he had just before he died in 2009, and he told the boyfriend to basically seal the computer. The boyfriend knew the password, he got hold of the files, he made copies of the files, never thinking it would come to the press, and sent it to Padre Pica's brother in Spain. Padre Pica is a Spaniard missionary, and these were printed out, put in a box, and kept in an attic in Madrid. And just a few years ago, Padre Pica's nephew, Fernando Pederast, started reading it, enjoyed the first half because he saw the wonderful work his uncle was doing in the mission field, and then stumbled across the most horrific accounts of clerical sex abuse.
And how many victims did that detail in the diary?
Padre Pica himself says in his own words that there were 85, and he writes 85 too many. He also talks about, he openly confesses in his diary that he was a pederast, that he took these accounts to his superiors, his confessors, his spiritual directors, and nothing was done.
And now this diary, how did it actually become headline news?
Well, the nephew, Fernando, was very disturbed, and he felt that there was a moral obligation on his part to expose the dark deeds of his uncle. So he took the diary to the Society of Jesus in Spain, the Society of Jesus in Bolivia. They didn't want anything to do with it. He approached the Spanish prosecutor, who said that he couldn't do anything because it was beyond the statute of limitations. And when nobody did anything, Fernando took it to El País, the Spanish newspaper, who broke the story last Saturday. And Brad, it was only 2 days after the story broke that Bolivia's Attorney General took this case up, and only then the Jesuit order, who had known about this all this while, immediately took action and suspended 7 provincials who have had a role in the cover-up of Padre Pica.
So, Jules, the Jesuits didn't need this diary to take such swift action, finally taking that swift action. They'd known about Father Pica's decades-long trail of abuse for years.
On the contrary, Brad, this trail goes right up to the Vatican. It goes right up to the Jesuit courier and to the Superior General, who was at that time Father Adolfo Nicholas, because Father Adolfo's admonitor, and admonitor is a person, is almost like the spiritual director of the Superior General. He's supposed to admonish the general if the general does something wrong. And the admonitor, Father Marcos Recolons, was one of the main Jesuits who protected Father Pederast, and there was a very close relationship between Pederast and between Father Recolons, as the diary spells out. Another person who knew about this who did nothing to tell Padre Pica that what he was doing was sinful and criminal, was Father Jose Arroyo, who, interestingly, was Pope Francis's tertianship instructor when Jorge Mario Bergoglio was studying to be a Jesuit. So this is how high the cover-up goes, Brad.
Okay, now at this point, it all comes down to this diary that finally made it into the media, and then finally there was legal actions being taken, or at least threatened. Some of our viewers, Jules, may be wondering, why in the world would a Jesuit, a gay sexual predator priest, why would he write about abusing young male victims in his diary?
I have that question as well, Brad. And this morning, a very high-ranking Jesuit told me that when a Jesuit is struggling with a particular sin and goes to the spiritual director often makes it incumbent on the priest to write his talk about his struggles, record his struggles in his diary. And that is probably almost certainly why Padre Pica had this so meticulously recorded in his diary, the dark deeds that he was perpetrating when he was a deputy director and director of the John 23rd College in Cochabamba, and then when he was appointed as in charge of the novices, Jesuit novices in Cochabamba and in Oruro. Again, he abused the Jesuit novices there to the extent that one of them even committed suicide.
Oh, wow. Jules, you've been on the trail of another Jesuit predator for several months, the notorious Father Rupnik, a Jesuit. Will the Bolivia scandal involving Father Pica prove to be an even bigger scandal, if that's possible, for the Jesuits than the Rupnik scandal, in your estimation?
I think they're two very different, although, again, both at the highest level, and numerically, of course, Padre Pica's scandal is far greater, and the harm to more victims is very clear. But Padre Pica is dead. Father Rupnik is still alive. And Father Rupnik's connections go straight to Pope Francis. That is where there's a profound difference here. Also, Padre Pica abused seminarians and boys. He was a homo predator. Father Rupnik abused women, particularly nuns, religious sisters. And shockingly, both of them have not yet been brought to justice.
Isn't that something? Jules, how do you see, you're speaking about justice here and being brought to justice, how do you see your role in reporting and journalism regarding the abuse victims when you are reporting on such horrific scandals?
Brad, I think, one needs to understand that we are doing what the police are doing when investigating serial murders in some sense, or a serial rapist, or a forensic pathologist is looking at these dead bodies that have been mutilated, because it is traumatic and it leaves a huge impact. It makes its impact on us. People often ask us rather mockingly, Jules, you're just muck-raking. But then you and I, Brad, Church Militant, what we're doing is because we are called by God to expose the deeds of darkness and bring them to light. And also, in conjunction with that, we're called to stand for these victims, particularly these victims in non-Western countries who would have absolutely no access to justice if not for media companies like Church Militant bringing these deeds to light in the English-speaking world. Yes, El Pais has done this in the Spanish world, but who is going to tell this story in the majority, what seems to be the majority, English-speaking world? And that, I think, is fundamental to our ministry, advocacy for these poor victims.
Yeah, even in America, Jules, it seems like the only thing that forces bishops to act, to have any level of transparency, is a lawsuit or bad press, and that both of these were needed to get them to act against the late Father Pica. Thank you for your reporting, Jules. Keep up being a voice for the victims. And if you viewers want to find out more about this article, please see Jules' fact-filled article on our website, churchmilitant.com. Thank you, Jules.
Thank you, Brad.